Today we are used to think of the Western as an American genre, as the American genre in fact. The full-length frontier novel of the 19th century, surprisingly, was dominated rather by European than American writers, given that whoever used to call himself or herself American back then was an immigrant to begin with. The distinction was kind of vague anyway. In the 19th century, Wild West novelists could be Germans like Balduin Möllhausen and Friedrich, Frenchmen like Gustave Aimard and Gabriel Ferry, Scots like Thomas Mayne Wright, or Austrians like Charles Sealsfield. Their legitimacy was not affected by their nationality, and their forgotten tales of the West are what I would like to tell you something about. Our next person of interest is going to be the German novelist Balduin Möllhausen. It was his biographer Preston Barba who branded Mölllhausen as being the German Cooper. In my opinion, Mölllhausen is far from copying Cooper's leatherstocking novels. Instead, he created a new type of frontier novel, all by his own, connecting narratives on different hemispheres in Germany and America within the same novel. This new type of frontier novel was picked up by compatriots such as both Theodor Fontane and Karl. In my opinion, Mölllhausen is also considerably worse as a writer than Cooper was, but he is a perfect example of what made the European frontier novelist of a century tick. In this video, I want to examine his life. In the following video, we are going to examine and analyze his most famous novel. Balduin Möllhausen was born 27th January 1825 in Bonn, back then a small town in the Rhinelands. His father was a lieutenant of the Lützow Free Corps, also called the Black Hunters, who had served in the Prussian army during the Napoleonic Wars. Balduin himself spent his childhood at the so-called Jesuitenhof, a building formerly owned by the Catholic Society of Jesus. He, on the other hand, was raised as a Protestant. Tall tales about power-seeking Jesuits' machinations may have reached and impressed the boy very early in his youth. Catholics in general, and Jesuit spies in particular, would become the most frequent antagonists of all his novels. Never having finished his education at the gymnasium due to financial concerns, Balduin Möllhausen first studied and worked some agriculture. Having absolved his military service, he went on his first journey to North America in 1849. There he joined an expedition by Duke Friedrich Paul Wilhelm of Württemberg, who lived from 1797 to 1860. They visited the Rocky Mountains and Wyoming in 1851, and it was here where he managed to live through the most exhausting and dangerous, but arguably also his most inspiring adventure. We will get to that very soon. With this and numerous other exciting stories to tell, he returned to Germany in 1853 and became a protégé of Friedrich Wilhelm Heinrich Alexander von Humboldt in Berlin, the famous Prussian geographer, naturalist and explorer who lived from 1769 to 1859. 2 years after they had met, Balduin Möllhausen married Humboldt's ward, Carolina Alexandra Seifert, who may or may not have been Humboldt's illegitimate daughter. Illegitimate heirs going missing and being found again would become another major theme in almost every one of Möllhausen's novels. With Humboldt's help, in 1854, Möllhausen became topographer and draughtsman for a scientific expedition under Lieutenant Amiel Weeks Whipple, who lived from 1880 to 1863. They traveled the far west of the United States, including San Francisco, during the time of the Gold Rush, and the Isthmus of Panama. Another expedition, this time under Lieutenant Joseph Christmas Ives, exploring Colorado and the Colorado River, was accompanied by Möllhausen in 1857. He created hundreds of paintings and drawings. He painted the first images of the Grand Canyon as well as the Mojave and Hualapai or Walpai natives who lived there. His diary of those expeditions, published 1858, and 1861, it was a two-parter, became his first success as an author. Over 40 novels would follow, most of those novels being about the American frontier. Mölllhausen, also described as the German Cooper, became one of Germany's most influential ethnographic novelists. Living in Berlin, he was a good friend of the Prussian novelist Theodor Fontane, who lived from 1819 to 1898. The Student of Prague, being both the title and the protagonist of several expressionist silent movies, was named Balduin after him by his younger friend and author Hanns-Heinz Ewers, who lived from 1871 to 1943. In the 1890s, Balduin Möllhausen's fame began to fade, when the competing novels of Saxon author Karl, who lived from 1842 to 1912, started outselling his own. Mölllhausen never needed to finish even one of Karl's novels to recognize that his rival had never set foot on any foreign country Mölllhausen had traveled in person. He may have been also very well aware of Karl having stolen numerous ideas and descriptions from his very own novels. Being outsold by what he considered such an obvious con artist, Mölllhausen was so furious he would forbid his family to even utter Karl's name. Mölllhausen died in Berlin the 18th of May 1905. He was 80 years old. Let us return to his first adventure. He was 28 years old when he joined the party of Duke Friedrich Paul Wilhelm of Württemberg, traveling along the Nebraska. The tomahawk of a hostile Pawnee had already killed one of their 4 horses, when at mid-November 1851 they were surprised by a blizzard, almost buried in snow, and their last horse killed. Having set camp at Sandy Hill Creek, Duke Wilhelm was lucky enough to trade their last remaining mule for a passage in the passing mail stage directed to Fort Laramie. The Duke was already in his 50s, and he hardly considered Mölllhausen as anything else but some disposable servant. So the Duke took the stage to Fort Laramie, while Mölllhausen was supposed to guard the remaining supplies at Sandy Hill Creek until the Duke would be able to send for help. I believe that the lot they did cast was just made up by Mölllhausen later to protect his former employer. Several days after the Duke's parting, a passing Delaware tried to convince Mölllhausen that no help would come because the blizzard had already blocked all the roads. But instead of going with the native, Mölllhausen insisted on waiting for the Duke. Some 14 days into his lonesome vigil, wolves had already caught his scent and kept his camp under siege. Now, Mölllhausen started to realize that the Delaware had been right, and that no help would come. 16 days passed. Mölllhausen survived fever and starvation, drinking opium and feeding on wolves' flesh. Then someone came, but it was not help. Mölllhausen had the good sense of hiding on a tree when he saw the 2 strangers approaching. Luckily he did that, because the first thing the 2 marauding Pawnees did do was firing about 8 arrows right into his empty tent. Firing back with his rifle, Mölllhausen killed 1 Pawnee, wounding the other. While Mölllhausen tried to tend to the remaining Pawnees' wounds, the wounded native took his knife and stabbed it right in direction of Mölllhausen's chest. Mölllhausen instinctively returned the stab and, moments later, found himself alone in the cold again. The night following this fateful day, and I quote from Mölllhausen's diary, was the most horrible of my life, because I felt slowly becoming insane. Both bodies were only several steps away from me. I myself was laying on my blankets, trying to cool my wounds with snow. There were no thoughts of rest or sleep, since the wolves, attracted by the scent of fresh blood, kept howling terribly and surrounding me and would not allow me any rest." End of quote. Another 2 weeks after burying the 2 bodies, which had already been half eaten by the wolves, Mölllhausen was finally found and saved by a group of natives from the Oto people, led by a half-Indian called Louis Farfar and their chief Wakitamone. They took Mölllhausen with them, saved him, and nurtured him back to health. This story contains a number of elements which can be found in his novels too. The snobbery of nobility, who would consider their servants disposable, the merciless nature, the danger looming from hostile natives, and finally, the surprising generosity of the peaceful ones. 1865's The Mandanenwaise, a tale from the Rhinelands and the Missouri River Valley, offers all of those and more. This was a new kind of novel, an original new model of frontier novels, which was completely Mölllhausen's own. Many scholars who have not actually read him therefore seem to assume that the majority of Mölllhausen's novels was structured in the same way. I'm not a specialist of Mölllhausen either. Of his over 40 novels, I personally read only 6, yet I feel very confident to make the call that only a very small percentage of Mölllhausen's novels follow the specific structure that he is best known for. I only know 2. 1865's The Mandanenwaise, and 1880's The Treasure of Quivira. If this is the type of novel he became best known for, then this is probably just because it had many famous imitators, among them both his rival Karl, but also his friend, the famous Prussian novelist Theodor Fontane, who lived from 1890 until 1898. Probably known to you for having been adapted for film by Rainer Werner Fassbinder and others. I like The Half-Indian from 1861 because in this novel Mölllhausen's influence on Karl May is the most obvious. I like The Treasure of Quivira from 1880, The Spy from 1893, and The Vaquero from 1905. For their surprising challenge of traditional gender norms. Mölllhausen likes to equip his female characters with characteristics that would by his contemporaries considered masculine, thus giving them a lot more agency than typical for other characters of their gender. That being said, most of Mölllhausen's characters lack actual individuality. Mölllhausen's landscape descriptions are beautiful and informative. The dialogue, however, is his greatest weakness. Every piece of dialogue sounds exactly the same, regardless of who is speaking it. His total disregard for any political stance other than his very own Prussian self is disturbing and annoying. My personal favorite novel is The Mormon Girl from 1865. Its description of Mormon life uses so many of the same tropes I get the suspicion Arthur Conan Doyle may actually have copied them from Mölllhausen for his very first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, in 1886. Still, Mölllhausen's description of Mormon life is more detailed, more truthful, and better than Arthur Conan Doyle's in about any way that you could imagine. Technically, the Mormons are the villains in both stories, A Study in Scarlet and The Mormon Girl, but Mölllhausen lets the Mormon characters have their say and grants their individual characters a lot of redeeming and sympathetic individual qualities that are lacking completely from Doyle's characters. In the next slideshow, I will summarize Mölllhausen's The Mandanenwaise. It will take some time, that's why I have saved it for the next slideshow. Bye.